Okay, now we're going to jump into SPSS Lab 2, which covers descriptive statistics and distributions. More specifically, our distributions of our continuous variables and how to analyze the distributions. In the first lab, which actually used this data set you see here, this is not the data set you're going to be using for Lab 2, simply here for illustration purposes. In Lab 1, you learned how to do basic graphing, pie charts, bar charts for our categorical variables, how to run frequencies of those categorical variables. You also learn how to run what we call histograms to look at the distribution of those continuous variables. And you also learn how to run a basic descriptive just to save the z-score, or what we call the standardized value, which tells how far someone's score on a given variable is from the mean, and how we could analyze that for our outliers. And again, today, or in this lab, you're going to be focused in specifically in descriptive statistics and doing a little further analysis of distributions. So again, we have our categorical variables of rank, gender, are they an athlete or not, and also smoking. If we look at our variable here, you can see we have 3 categories: never smoked, previously smoked, still a smoker. And then we have a bunch of continuous variables like height and weight, sprint time, scores on English, reading, math, writing, how much time they reported sleeping, how much time they reported studying. So that's our data set. Again, you're probably familiar with that. So again, one of the first things we want to do when we're doing descriptive statistics is for our categorical variables. Again, we're going to compute frequencies. We are not going to report means and such because they don't make sense in this case. If I wanted to know the mean of gender, well, what does that mean? Males were 0 and females were 1, or vice versa. The mean, if the mean was 0.25, well, what does that tell us? That doesn't tell us anything. Instead, what we want to know is what percent were male, what percent were female. Same thing for athlete. How many or what percent were athletes, what percent were not, and so on. So we're not going to use mean, median, mode. We're going to use frequency. So like we did last week, but as a quick review, I'm going to start with analyze, descriptive statistics, frequencies. And in this case, I'm going to choose, like I showed you in previous, I'm going to choose all my categorical variables, put them all in. And again, if I wanted to, I could select bar chart or pie chart if I wanted to include those. I'm not going to for our purposes. And then I'm going to hit OK. And so for our frequencies, if I just want to know about our sample, in this case, there's 400 and some students, I can get a breakdown by what percent freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, what percent male and female, what percent were athletes and what percent weren't, and then which percent falls into these categories to smoking. That is a really quick way to run frequencies or our descriptive statistics for our categorical variables. Again, if you wanted to also add a bar chart, which you're going to need to do for this assignment, you can either do it through the graph function, or I would highly recommend going back, frequencies, and then hitting chart, select your bar chart, and then in addition to these tables, you're going to get your bar charts. All right, so now for our continuous variables, those variables that we want to look at that have a distribution. From your information, from your reading and such, you know that the important variables are mean, median, mode. We also have what we call measures of variability or dispersion, so how kind of dispersed the distribution is around the mean. We have things like standard deviation, variance, and range. And then we also have a way to evaluate the actual distribution. We have things called skew and kurtosis. And again, skew is basically how far out the tail goes. So if something is skewed, it may have a lot of data in the right tail, off to the right side, or it may have a lot of data off to the left side, meaning it's skewed in that way. And then kurtosis deals with how peaked or how flat the distribution is, again, in comparison to a standard normal distribution, which would be evenly skewed, have an even kurtosis, or what we consider normal skew and normal kurtosis. So for that, we want to run descriptive statistics. So I'm going to go to descriptive statistics. I'm going to select descriptives. In this case, I'll just pick a couple of them. Let's pick English and let's pick sleep time. I could pick all of these if I wanted, and make sure you look at exactly which ones are required for your assignment. Obviously, again, this is not the same data set that you're going to be using, but whatever the variables that you need this information for. An important step, don't hit OK, is to go up to the options, and actually then you'll see a box that looks like this, which actually you can tell SPSS which data, what kinds of descriptive statistics do you want. You can see you get the mean here, standard deviation here, minimum score, maximum, variance, and range are important data. And then here, our distribution, skew, kurtosis, and skewness. It'll give a value. And again, I'll briefly talk about that in just a minute, how to interpret that. But I can get all of that information. I'll hit continue. Remember, if I want to save the scores to look at the z-scores, I click this little box. We talked about that last week. And I hit OK. And now if I want to look at my data, I have descriptive statistics. So you can see here, I have English. There were 409 data points. The range, which is basically the highest score minus the lowest. You can see here's the minimum, maximum. Here's the mean right here. So this value right here of 101.95, that's the mean score on that assessment for those students. Oh, excuse me, that is not. That is the maximum score. The mean is this number right here, 82.78. I apologize for that. So the mean score on that is 82.78. The maximum score was 101.95. And then you have all of your other variables or other pieces of information like standard deviation, variance, skew, and kurtosis. Now for sleep time, you can see here the mean reported sleep time. These guys are definitely not sleeping as much as they should. 5.46 is their amount of sleep they're getting per night, and you can see all of the other statistics that go along with that. All right, so that's the data that you're going to get and report. So for all of your variables, you would have range, minimum, maximum, a mean, standard deviation, the variance, and then skew and kurtosis. And what you're really looking for as a rule of thumb in your skew and kurtosis, so you're looking at this where it says statistic, anything that falls between, on the low end, negative 1.0, and at the high end, positive 1.0, so anywhere between negative 1, positive 1, if the value for skew or kurtosis fits in there, that means your distribution is okay. There's not major skew or major kurtosis. If the value is below negative 1, that means you have a negatively skewed distribution. If it's below negative 1 in kurtosis, that's going to be a fairly flat, or what we call a platykurtic distribution. If the statistic is above 1.0 in skew, that means you have positive skew. So you're going to have a lot of data in the far right end of your distribution. Or if it's above 1.0 in kurtosis, that means you probably have a pretty peaked or what we call leptokurtic distribution. Just a way to kind of describe that distribution and how far it deviates from what we call a more standard distribution. Remember again, if I want to run for these two, if I wanted to just look at the distributions visually, I can go to the histogram and let me just pick, I'll just pick the English one just for our purposes, put the normal curve on there, and you can see here. And notice how the data that's listed right here matches our data up here. Obviously it's rounded, but our mean is the same, standard deviation, and then the total number. So this gives you a picture of the distribution. It's pretty normally distributed. So again, descriptive statistics, frequencies for our categorical variables. For our continuous variables, we want things like mean, standard deviation, skew, and kurtosis. You might say, well, what about median and mode? What if I want to do that? Well, you can also do that by going to the Analyze, and here you have to go to frequencies. Get that out. Let's just go back to the English one. And if I go to statistics, I can select mean, median, mode. And pay attention here because, again, this is not under the descriptives. It's under the descriptives and then frequencies, not the descriptives and then the descriptive statistics. So if I go to continue and then hit OK, you can see here, it gives me my mean again, and then I have my median in mode. I should not have clicked the button to give me the table because I don't need all of these values, but you just really need this little box right here. All right, so for your assignment, you're going to run frequencies, you're going to run bar charts. You're going to run, for our continuous variables, you're going to run these histograms, and you're going to run statistics, descriptives like this, and also the median and mode. And then the last thing you're going to do is you're going to, actually the second to last thing you're going to do is you're going to evaluate the skew and kurtosis values. Again, if it's above 1 or below -1, we've got some problems with skew and kurtosis for a variable. If in this case they're between those two, we don't worry about it. Those are fine. And then the last thing we're going to do for the assignment is you're going to do what you did last week, which is again evaluate the z-scores for any outliers. And so if I go back, again, remember to my data set, you can see I have the z-scores. I ran them, and I remember I saved the standardized values. And all I'm simply looking for, if you remember, is values above 3 or below -3. Again, since there's 400 and some in this data set, it could be a lot of scrolling. So a quick way to do that, I can just run the frequencies for those two variables. They're always going to be on the bottom of your list of variables because they're in the far right column. If I hit OK, now we have, okay, we're looking again. Oh, so we see a couple that are below -3. So I've got two outliers on the left end. Those are probably, if we scroll up here, again, there's a reason why we don't run this big table. You can see they're probably these two outliers down over here. And then I'm looking for any values that are above 3.0. So when I scroll down here, there are none. So we only have those two outliers. And now for sleep time, we look here, there's no outliers on the negative end. And if I look down here, I see, oh, there are 3, so frequency, there are 3 values that are above 3. So there are 3 outliers for the sleep time variable. So again, for this data set, for this assignment, the primary things you're needing to look at are running frequencies, running descriptive statistics, means, median, mode, standard deviation, such, running histograms. You're also going to run, as we looked at last week, you're going to run bar charts, bar graphs, and then also looking at the z-scores, again, for any outliers. So again, make sure you please carefully read the assignment. Reach out if you have any questions.